Hi, my name is Jason Alster, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Author. Tonight we have Chuck Miceli and his book, Amanda's Room. How are you?
Great, Jason.
Well, because Halloween is coming up and we're in October, so we have a great book for Halloween. There's a storm coming, and her name is Amanda. When death came for Amanda Reynolds, it could not pry her from her room. Katie Jarvis knows that Amanda is attempting to communicate in the only way she knows how, by altering the weather. But Katie cannot decipher what Amanda is saying or why, and time is running out. Something is stalking Katie and her team. As the violence of the weather takes on monstrous proportions, they must unravel the meaning in the storms, or no one will be safe from the power of Amanda's Room. Okay, so in Amanda's Room, the weather is a character in the book, right?
Actually, in Amanda's Room, you might say that the weather is the character.
The character, okay.
In many books, the weather is the background. Mm-hmm. It sets the stage. It gives a setting for all of the action to take place. What I wanted to do in Amanda's Room was to bring the weather front and center, and so the weather becomes the story.
And what in your background gave you this idea of having the weather a character in the book?
Actually, it wasn't so much my background. The weather came later. The original concept for Amanda's Room was about a room with a perfect environment, a room in which, if you went into it, everything about it, the lighting level, the sound level, all of that would be in what you would call the realm of perfection. In addition, there was something else that emotionally, temperamentally, when you went into the room, you also felt this sense of overwhelming peace and calmness. So that was the essence of the original concept, which was called The Room. Mm-hmm. But as I fleshed that out into a full-blown book and started to tell people about that concept, a funny thing happened. This is back several years ago, and people would say to me, "Oh, have you read The Shack?" Mm. There was this wonderful book that came out called The Shack, and in it, the author portrays a building out in the forest in which a man goes into this building, and he's in this perfect environment. Turns out his daughter had died, and he meets God in the shack. Mm-hmm. Well, people began to equate my book with that one. And I was concerned that if I published it at that point, people would simply say, "Oh, this is a ripoff." Even though I had never read The Shack, people would say, this is just a copycat of that. And so I decided I needed to expand the story. I needed to make it bigger. I needed to make the conflict bigger. And I needed to broaden the scope of the story so that it engrossed the reader and put them into a totally different environment. And so the idea about the environment, I kept playing with that. Well, what about the environment? What can I do to make the environment bigger? Mm. And then that grew from the environment itself to the temperature, to the pressure, the barometric pressure, and then to this idea about weather and storms. And so I actually took some courses on weather and did a couple years of research on the internet on weather. And the more I researched, the more fascinated I became.
Would you say that you're giving your characters of the weather a human proportion, or or a paranormal proportion? What would you call that?
Well, actually, the book's called Amanda's Room. Mm-hmm. And we should step back a little bit and talk just a little bit about Amanda. Mm-hmm. Amanda died 18 years ago at a very, very young age and under mysterious circumstances. Mm-hmm. Her spirit remained. While Amanda died, she had unfinished business, and she needed to continue to finish that business. Now, in the cover of the book,
is Amanda a real person?
Amanda's a real person.
Okay.
Amanda's this person who died very young a long time ago. But she's existed alone in this mansion, in an abandoned mansion, for the last 18 years. And because she died so young and has not had the benefit of human contact for 18 years, she needed to find a way to communicate without words. And so Amanda begins to understand how she can manipulate the environment. And through manipulating the environment, she begins to understand how she could actually manipulate
So Amanda
the
has
weather.
a presence.
Yes. And as the book continues, the relationship between Amanda and the environment and Amanda and the weather become closer and closer and closer until toward the end of the book, it's difficult to tell which is which.
Okay. Tell us how you got to write such a book.
Well, my background is in criminal justice. And quite a few years ago, early in my career, there was a significant problem throughout the country. Deadly fires in prisons and jails. And I was doing consulting at that time for a number of criminal justice organizations. And they came to me and said, would you do some research and put together a pamphlet for administrators on what to do about these deadly fires? So I sent for material throughout the country.
Prisoners dying in the fires?
Yes,
Or
within a span of, maybe perhaps 2 or 3 months, 69 inmates and correctional staff died in fires.
was this in Connecticut or around the country?
This is around the country. But these were fires where one after the other, in one 6 people might die, and another 11, in another one 14. And they were happening throughout the country in rapid succession. And so they said, would you do some research on this? So I did the research, teamed up with a fire marshal who also happened to be the fire marshal at a maximum security prison. And together, we put together this pamphlet that turned out to be a 130-page book. Now, the interesting thing was, as we did the research, the same story kept coming up over and over and over again. Thin plywood paneling, mounted onto 2x4 studs with air channels behind it. A thing called styrene butadiene rubber. It was the stuff that the mattresses was made out of and the stuff the padded cells were made of. It was a new material that was being introduced. We call it latex. Trouble is, they would treat it in such a way that it would be fireproof with a powder. Over the years, the powders would settle, leaving just the latex. And then if you lit a match to latex, you set off these very acrid and very toxic fumes that quickly spread throughout a facility. So we put together the manual, which turned out to be 130 pages long, and I was approached by the National Institute of Justice and asked, could we put this into a book? And so I re-edited it, and it came out as Fire Behind Bars.
That was the name of the book?
That was the name of the book, Fire Behind Bars.
Okay.
So as a result of that, I spent a couple years flying around the country, doing workshops and seminars, and then broke off from that.
So in a way, this wasn't your first book?
No.
I got you.
This is my first novel.
Your first novel.
But I never lost the bug of that sharing with people
But you were
the
an
results
author.
of that work.
You were an author.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like you to read a part about the book that people who are enjoying Halloween coming up would really love, okay?
All right. Okay, we'll read a section here. There's a fellow in the book, his name is Ralph, and Ralph has some designs on one of the main characters in the book. And the designs are not necessarily moral or of goodwill.
Okay.
And Ralph gets his comeuppance in this chapter here.
Okay.
So, he was splashing on his 8-year-old aftershave when the doorbell rang. Ralph glanced out the bathroom window. It was gray, dark, and raining hard. The doorbell rang again. I'm coming, he shouted as he came down the stairs, giddy as Scrooge on Christmas morning. A lightning flash stopped him cold. The thunder shook the house. Thunder and lightning terrified Ralph, and this storm was worse than most. Another flash, another clap, and the house went dark. Ralph was temporarily blinded. He fell back against the stair treads. He wanted to turn and run upstairs for cover, but his lust overcame his fear. Ralph felt his way down the stairs. Knocking replaced the silent doorbell. "Hold your horses," he shouted. "I'm almost there." The only light in the foyer peeked in through the half-moon window at the top of the front door. Ralph was still speaking as he opened it. "Tess, you're going to be so glad you..." A blinding flash, a deafening thunderclap, and with it, the thick blade sliced through Ralph's ribs and deep into his gut. The force of the strike chipped pieces of bone on the way in and knocked Ralph down on the hallway rug. Everything went blurry. Then he felt the blood gushing up into his throat and tasted the saltiness in his mouth. The light from the street lamp dimmed and then faded away completely as the front door closed slowly and quietly. Ralph looked down toward his stomach. He could just make out the glove wrapping itself around the thick hilt of the knife. As everything faded to black, Ralph watched in horror at the slow twisting of the blade.
That's enjoyable.
Yeah, I think for Halloween that's pretty appropriate.
That's pretty good. You know, I felt that chip. Now, I really like the cover of the book. Tell us about who did the cover and what exactly does it mean?
Okay. I'm very proud to say that my son, Mike Miceli, designed the cover for me. Mike is a graphics and video designer, and I gave him the scene. That essentially is the opening scene of the book. This is the mansion that Amanda has lived in, or existed in, for the last 18 years. Out in front of the mansion, there is a statue of St. Michael in battle with Satan. And that stands as a metaphor for essentially what's going on throughout the book.
That's a real place?
It's a place that I created.
Oh, it's a place you created,
Yeah.
okay.
I
Is this a real statue, or are you created the statue?
It's all elements. The top of the fountain, I got from one place.
Okay.
The house from another. The base of the fountain, Michael got from another place. And so I asked him to combine all these elements, and then I said, now the essence of the book is about the weather. And it's about stormy and thunderous weather. And so I'd like you to combine these elements and surround them with violent weather, and then give the overall cover a Gothic look, because it's really a Gothic novel. And he took all of those elements, and then he combined them, even in terms of the selection of the font, and he created that cover.
Very nice. You say, I read the book, you say Gothic novel. Personally, I didn't feel it that way, but why do you say that? What's the definition of a Gothic novel?
Well, for me, that the room and the setting are in themselves somewhat paranormal. There's something about the look of the house. In fact, early in the book, Cynthia Reynolds, Amanda's mother, in the very opening chapter, as the car is driving up to the house, she's always felt uncomfortable about the house. And tonight, something about it terrifies her. And it talks about the fountain. It talks about St. Michael in battle with Satan atop this fountain. It talks about the columned entry. It even talks about that it opens around Christmas time. And that there's a tree on the second floor in this large window, and it's lighted, and that even the tree is looking down at her, mocking and grotesque. So that's what I meant by this Gothic, that there's really a feel about the setting. In fact, I specifically chose the setting of the Catskills for the book because of Washington Irving and things like Rip Van Winkle, this idea that you could fall asleep and not wake up for 100 years.
Okay.
And that when you do wake up in a place in which the weather plays such a vital role for the whole valley. This idea of when the thunder roars, it is so loud that you can't mistake it. In fact, Rip Van Winkle asks, he says, what is that? And people say, that's Henry Hudson and his crew bowling in the sky. And there really are places.
No, now that
like
you
that.
mentioned that, it just came to my mind, The Wizard of Oz, with the weather and the hurricane and the twister that brought Dorothy to the land of Oz.
To the land
you
of
know?
Oz, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
The
And
other
then
side
just
apart,
just
which
south.
is in another spot, but that wasn't the Hudson Valley.
No, but just south of the Hudson Valley, actually it's still part of the Hudson Valley, but a little further south from the Catskill area, you've got the setting for Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman. So
Oh, okay.
again, all of that takes place in that area. And I used to vacation there when I was with my wife and just said, this is a good setting for this kind of a book.
And Benedict Arnold, in the same area.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about, in the book, I see Felix the Cat there.
This is actually
Sound.
this is actually called the Kit Kat clock. And I do a number of book readings and signings. And what's great about this,
Gotta move that.
there you go. And then you can see his eyes, and the tail here is wagging as well.
eyes, yeah.
And when I do these book signings, it's great because kids will walk by with their parents, and they'll point and they'll say, boy, that's a creepy looking clock.
A creepy looking clock.
Creepy looking clock. And many parents will say, oh, I remember that clock. My grandmother used to have that, or my mother used to have it. Or some of
I was
the older
scared.
folks will say, I still have that clock.
Okay.
When I was growing up in Pennsylvania, in a little coal mining town called Pittston, my grandmother had this clock in her kitchen.
Oh, okay.
And I would walk in, and the eyes moving and the tail wagging always fascinated me. So when I came up with this idea of Amanda's room, this room that by itself has supernatural powers, I thought, what kind of furnishings would be in that room? What kind of clock would hang on the wall of that kind of room?
Okay.
And so I came up with the Kit Kat clock. Now, in Amanda's room, the eyes move back and forth, the tail wags, but the hands never move. They stay fixed throughout they stay fixed. And there's a great significance to that in the book.
And I'll have to read the book to find out why.
Yes.
Tell us about Galileo's barometer, is that?
This is actually Galileo's thermoscope.
Thermoscope. What is a thermoscope?
Galileo was a genius who experimented in many, many areas, but one of the areas that he experimented was temperature. And what
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I hadn't either until I've had one of these for many years, and I've given them as gifts. But what Galileo figured was the density of liquid changes with temperature. And so each of these glass globes have liquid in them, and they're fixed within the glass globe. And those globes are fixed within a larger cylinder that has liquid in it. And because the liquid tends to pressurize differently inside the globes versus outside, as the temperature increases, the globes sink lower into the cylinder. And each globe, might be a little difficult to see it on the television, but each globe at the bottom of it has a small gold tag.
We'll turn it around a little bit so we'll get that.
Okay.
Actually, you can see it's enlarged underneath the magnifying of the water in the glass.
Yeah. Well, each of these tags has a number on it.
But you can also turn this up and watch them float as we go down.
Notice
Actually,
they're still floating.
Yep.
Now they're trying to change position.
Yeah. Demonstrate how that works.
So each of these globes has a tag, and the tag has a number. The number, in this case, is in Fahrenheit, and it gives the temperature. So what you do is, because as the temperature increases, they sink lower to the bottom, you look for the lowest hanging globe, and if you read the temperature on that, it tells you what the temperature in the room is right now.
75 degrees.
There you go. So this room is right now 75 degrees. If the room started to get hotter, that ball would start floating down, and the next ball you'd read.
And what did that have to do with the book?
Well, in Amanda's room,
Of course, we're talking about the weather and the temperature.
the weather, the temperature, and Katie Jarvis is my heroine. She is the principal character in the book, she is the one who understands what Amanda's doing. She's the one that first comes to discover that Amanda still exists in the room and that Amanda is trying desperately to communicate something, and she's using the weather to do it.
It's like, the weather's like a medium. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
For contacting in a seance, should be the medium, the weather?
Even more than a seance, because Amanda is
Well,
playing
I'm
an
just using
active role.
that as an
She's
example.
actively using the weather to try and communicate. But Katie and her team, because she has a group of other college students, and together they have a research team under the guidance of their professor, Bert Myers. And they are all trying to figure out what she's trying to figure out what Amanda's trying to say and convince the others that that's what Amanda's doing. So anyway, in the book, there's one much larger than this. It goes all the way up to 96 degrees. All the balls are sitting at the bottom. And there's significance to that, especially a year after that scene.
Okay.
So this is a clue as to what Amanda's doing and where she's going.
Okay. So Amanda left some clues.
Yes.
How has your experience been in book signings and people? And have you heard from people who have read the book? Have they gotten back to you and discussed things with you? Brought up any issues? What have you heard?
Well, first of all, that's been my favorite part.
As an author?
As an author, what I most enjoy is the personal interaction with people, the book readings, the signings. I'm doing a book club this week and meeting with people, and that's a real kick. It's why I write. I write because of the experience that people have reading the book. And thank God, people have come back to me, and repeatedly the comments are, I couldn't put it down. I was sorry when it ended. And the most interesting one,
They were sorry when it ended?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I was really...
You don't hear that too often, but you do hear that.
Yeah, it's been very gratifying.
So are you going to be having a follow-up book when you hear something like that? It means they want a sequel.
Yeah.
Can this book turn into a sequel if you want? Or it ends here?
In the book, Katie Jarvis...
Or you might not know.
Oh, no, I know.
Okay.
In the book, Katie Jarvis closes each major chapter of her life. But she keeps a journal, a series of journals. And she closes each major chapter of her life by making a note in her journal, to be continued. Then she closes that journal, and she puts that one away and starts the next one. Well, the book ends with her writing her last entry in the journal, and underneath that she writes, to be continued.
To be continued, okay.
So you can bet your bottom dollar that Katie Jarvis will be coming back.
So has Hollywood contacted you yet for a movie like this?
No, but that really...
I'm giving them a hint.
Well, good, and I hope so, because I wrote the book for the movie.
Oh, you did? You actually had a movie in mind when you wrote the book. That's excellent.
And gratifyingly, many of the people who have read the book, who didn't know that, have written back to me and said, as they read the book, they could actually see the scenes of the movie playing out in their heads.
Now, very quickly, here in Wethersfield, we have a book networking group that actually I run for CAPA, Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. Now, I knew you had come to a couple of those when you were writing the book or when you were starting to produce the book. So very quickly, we have a minute left. How has that helped you with the publication and the marketing of the book? What have you learned from that, from talking with other authors?
Well, my personal experience with the entire CAPA organization and the networking meetings in particular has been invaluable. They say writing's a lonely profession, and it is. You really, for much of the creative process, you're isolated. And having an organization, having a community of people who are all trying to exchange ideas, trying to help each other, trying to work together to promote the craft of writing, and then actually get out and market and sell the books has been enormously helpful.
So you weren't alone?
God, no.
Well, Chuck, thank you for coming on Meet the Author.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
This has been a very interesting show, and I hope some people get out there and get this right before Halloween. Okay?
Me too. Me too.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jason.